The song from somewhere else. This is chapter 2. When Frank woke the next morning, there was an echo of something dreamlike in her ears. Although she couldn't hear the music of the day before, of Nick's house, it was still with her, still in her somewhere. She tried humming it, but it was impossible to pin down, impossible to recall exactly. She needed to hear it again, to refresh her memory. That was the only answer. And then, as those thoughts circled her, she looked at herself and realised that she couldn't remember the last time she'd woken up happy, the last time before this morning. Before breakfast, Frank racked her brains to think of an excuse to go knock on Nicholas's door. Had he been Jess, it would have been natural to run round and rattle the letterbox and say, "Is Jess in?" And had she been Jess, she'd have run over and knocked on a new door without caring. Jess was like that, though perhaps she thought not Nicholas Underbridge's. This boy was a completely different kettle of fish. She couldn't just roll up unexpected out of the blue. But when she'd finished eating, her dad said, "It's a beautiful day, Frank. It'd be a waste to spend it indoors. Why don't you go out and get some fresh air? Get on your bike." It was clear he'd forgotten of her previous evening. He'd even unbuckled her back wheel and, although it wobbled a tiny bit and zooshed along the brake pad every time it went round, it worked fine. "Where will I go?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "Is Jess away? What about Amanda?" "No one's around," she said. "Well, never mind then," he said, shrugging. "When I was your age, I used to buzz up and down the street doing skids and seeing how fast I could go. I'm sure you'll find something to do. Enjoy the freedom, the fresh air, the sunshine. It won't be summer holidays forever, you know." He always went on about his childhood, like it had been 100 years ago, all in black and white with nothing to do but kicking tin cans in the street. Frank didn't believe much of it. She couldn't actually imagine him being a boy, even though they'd shown her photographs. They couldn't have been pictures of any. They could have been pictures of any boy, she thought. The boy they said was him didn't have his beard, and although that wasn't exactly surprising, the boy being only a boy, it meant he didn't look anything like him. "Okay," she said, "I might go and see Nick." "Oh, this new boy, yeah. Your mum mentioned him. Where's he live?" "Lime Avenue," she said, "over by the school." "Fine," she said. "Don't go further than that, though, and make sure you're back in time for lunch. I'm cooking salad, okay?" That was sort of the weird thing that he'd always said, trying to sound funny. Jess would laugh, but Frank wished he'd just behaved like a normal dad. "Okay," she said. And so, 5 minutes later, she was sat on her bike in the Underbridge's front garden. At the bottom of the close where she lived, there was an opening in the hedges around the park, where the path went in it. They called it a park, but really was just a field between the estates with a football pitch marked out for Saturdays, and the playground tucked away over in the far corner. Her heart whimpered whenever she leant to look over the hedge. It seemed like Noble spent half his time kicking dust up around the wreck. If she saw him before he saw her, he'd run away and go home or do something else instead. Today, though, this morning at least, he hadn't been there. The coast had been clear, but she still cycled as quickly as she could out of habit. She dropped her bike on the little patch of scrubland out on the front garden. She'd come this far, but unsurprised at herself, she now didn't know how to knock. What would she say? All she wanted to do was to ask Nicholas about the music. She didn't want to hang around with him or anything like that. That seemed rude. It seemed weird, too, to be there at all. After standing in front of the door for a minute, hand half lifted to the knocker, her stomach half talking her into picking up her bike and going, she heard whistling behind her. "All right, kid," her voice said. She turned and was face to face with the postman. He shuffled his bag up on his shoulder and handed her a pile of letters. "I don't..." "And there's this," said the postman, before she could protest, pulling out his bag a long, brown, rectangular parcel. He balanced it on top of the letters she was holding. "Cheers," he said, turned and headed across the road, whistling again. She stood there. It seemed the decision had been made for her. Had it just been the letters, she could have slipped them through the letterbox and then been off and away, but this parcel wasn't going to fit through, and she couldn't just leave it on the doorstep. Anything could happen, so she knocked. There was quite a long silence during which she began to think no one was at home, but then she heard movement and rattling inside, and the door opened. with Mr. Underbridge. He stared at her as if they'd never seen each other before, but then he pointed and said, "Francesca Patel." She handed him the post. "A bit young for a summer job, aren't you?" "I met the postman as I was passing by," she said. "He asked me to put these through your door, but that one wouldn't fit." She pointed to the parcel. Mr. Underbridge took the box and, recognising the rattle, said, "Brushes, great." And he began teasing off the sticky tape. And then he looked up. "Do you want to come in? Nick's round somewhere." He looked over his shoulder and called upstairs. "Nick, your friend's here." "Eek," thought Frank. "There's that word, the F word. Got to be careful. Don't be too friendly." "Come in," Mr. Underbridge said. "Best wheel your bike around the back first." He pointed up the side of the house. "I'll meet you at the back door." Frank and Nicholas sat in the kitchen, drinking squash and eating biscuits again. Mr. Underbridge leant in the doorway, sipping his coffee. "How's Nick getting on at school?" he asked her. "Never tells me anything. You know what kids are like." Her stomach laughed quietly. She was a kid. She had a good idea what she was like, but she had no idea what Nick was like. She couldn't remember anything about his life at school. Well, nothing that she could tell his dad. "How do you say your son's not very popular because he's got fleas and smells weird?" The only thing she could smell now was a pleasant yet strange, faint, earthy, foresty smell that she'd noticed the night before. Maybe that's what he smelt like in the classroom, and it was just the weirdness and the oddness of it at school that made people roll their noses up at him. Maybe they mistook the cool, stony outdoorsiness of it as unwashed clothes. "Well," she said, trying not to catch Nicholas' eye as she spoke, "everyone knows him. They talk about him a lot." That wasn't a lie. "Popular, huh?" "You don't take after me," Nicholas's dad said. Couldn't stand it myself, all those tests. I just wanted to get some paper out and get drawing. That was all I cared about. Do you draw, Frank? "Dad," Nicholas said pleadingly, "leave her alone. She doesn't need an interrogation." He turned to Frank. "He's a painter and thinks everyone else should be painters as well." "That's not true," Mr. Underbridge said, shaking his head. "There are lots of jobs in this world and many of them are important, but I don't like them, that's all. I found out that very early on. I couldn't do anything else. But Nick, if you want to grow up to be a second assistant under manager in the sewage works, then so be it. Plumbing's important, very important. Where would we be without it? But me, I just wouldn't know where to begin." As Mr. Underbridge was talking, Frank felt a shiver go up her spine. Somewhere, just at the edge of her hearing, she could hear the music again. She still couldn't tell where it was coming from, and a moment later it was gone, and she wasn't even sure she'd heard anything at all. Her spine tingled all the same. "I do like to draw," she said. "I do good treasure maps." Mr. Underbridge smiled. "Well, I hope one day one of them leads to the right place to dig," he said. Then he took his leave. He went down the hall and through the door on the right into what would normally be the lounge. "That's his studio," Nicholas said. "Once he's shut the door, he cannot be disturbed. He'll be there all day now, I reckon." "What does he paint?" "Stuff," Nicholas said. "Those are his paintings in the hall there. He sells them to hotels to hang in bedrooms. Next time you're on holiday, check the signature. You might find yourself face to face with an Underbridge original." From where they sat, Frank could see the colourful, strange, blobby canvases stacked against the white walls. Though she couldn't see them well, she remembered them from the night before. She hadn't known they'd been Nick's dad's paintings, but had liked them. She wasn't sure that she wanted to sleep in a room with them, though. They might have been full of light and colour, but there was sadness in them too, as if a shipwreck was happening somewhere just outside the frame. She wondered if maybe it was to do with Nick's mum being, somewhere else. That was the sort of thing artists would paint about, wasn't it? Were they divorced? Was she dead? Nick hadn't said. And then there was the music again. It was quiet, far off, but definitely there. "What's that music?" she asked Nick, happy to have the opportunity. For some reason, she had been worried about just bringing it up out of the blue. Hearing it last night had been like overhearing a secret. "What music?" Nick said slowly. Frank held up her finger, pointed into the air. "That music," she said, laughing. Nicholas put his glass of squash down with a heavy-handed bang. "I can't hear anything." He looked at the table, rolling his fingertips through a mirrored pool where they had spilt some squash, and cleared his throat. The music was faint, she thought. Maybe he couldn't hear it. Maybe his ears were too far off the ground. being him so tall and broad and heavy, that the sound wouldn't reach them. It was a mean thought, she thought as soon as she thought it, but she couldn't take it back. You must listen, she urged. If only she could tell where it was coming from. It was lifting her heart to hear it, even to hear a hint of it. She smiled. It seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. She caught herself smiling. She tried to hum along, tried to catch a melody, catch up with the melody. La, la, it for him. But it was too tricky. It kept slipping away from her like a cat who didn't want to be caught. Oh, she thought suddenly, poor Quintinus Minimus. Where is he? Oh, that music, Nick said, rubbing an ear, a finger into his ear. That's just Dad's music. That's what he listens to while he's working. Do you know what it's called? Who it is? Who's it's by? No. Can we ask? No, I told you. We're not allowed in when he's working. Why do you want to know anyway? Frank thought. She didn't know quite how to put it into words, how to say what the music made her feel, how to explain it. A moment went by. Here we go, said her stomach, as if it knew what was coming next. I'm not happy, she said, surprising herself. Those boys? Nick looked at her, his grey eyes unmoving, unblinking, not unsad in themselves. He didn't laugh. Yeah. How long? He asked. Ages, she said. Yeah, he said. But last night, she went on, last night I heard that music when I was here, just before I went home, and it, I don't know, it helped. Yeah, he said again, nodding. He looked away, scratched at the table. It was strange, she thought, talking to him like this, him of all people. It was as if he would understand somehow, in a way that Jess never did, in a way her parents never could. Let's have some more biscuits, Nicholas said, breaking the spell, and then we'll get some paper and draw some maps. I like maps too. Half an hour later, the kitchen table was covered with maps. Some were real, some were imagined. Frank had drawn a map of her house. Nick had replied with a map that explained a book he had been reading. A long spiral of mountains down the middle, a huge forest, and a single mountain far off on the right. Here be dragons, he wrote. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, considering the size of his hands. She drew an island in the shape of a skull, where cutthroat Hake had buried not only his treasure, but also his cabin boy to guard it as a ghost. And as they drew, the ghosts of the faint echoing, inspiring music buoyed them up. It was the treasure she buried, the gold the dragon guarded. With it there around them, they didn't even need to talk. And then the phone rang. It was a harsh interruption, snapping them out of the daydream they fallen into. Nick lumbered as quickly as he could into the hallway, where the phone sat on a little table. He lifted the receiver and said the number. After a moment he said, "Hang on," and he held the handset to his wide chest, lumbered back to the kitchen door. "It's my gran," he said. "She rings every week. There's no way to get rid of her. I have to be good and listen. I'll be 10 minutes tops." And he pulled the door shut. Oh well, Frank thought, and leant back over the map. She was colouring him. It was only after a minute she realised something odd. The music wasn't any quieter. It was still quiet, but it wasn't quieter than it had been. She assumed it was quiet because Mr. Underbridge's studio door was shut, but now another door in between his studio and the kitchen was shut too, and the music was no quieter. She had the strangest feeling, as if she had learnt something important, but she couldn't tell what it was. As she sat and thought, she knocked a pen with her elbow. She watched it roll across the table and fell onto the floor with a clatter. Pushing her chair backwards, she clambered down onto her knees, and as she knelt down there on the cold tile, she saw something that made her go, "Ooh." The wall opposite her had a gap at the bottom. There was a good half centimetre or so where it didn't reach the floor. It wasn't the whole door, just a section about the width of a door. She could hear the low rumble of Nick's talking in the hallway. She got to her feet and went over to the wall. She hadn't noticed this door before because it was painted the same colour as the rest of the kitchen and had a calendar hanging on it. A plastic bag full of other plastic bags dangling from a hook at the side. A hook that, she now saw, was actually a latch. She touched it, rested her finger on it. It was cold metal, painted white. She pushed down, and on the other side of the door a catch lifted. With an outward puff of cool air, the door opened an inch. Frank tested the door, pulling and pushing it back and forth without fully opening it. It swung easily on silent hinges. She couldn't decide if it was a secret door or not. She did know, however, that it would be wrong to go through it, at least without asking. She let the door swing open wider and looked in. The music was louder, clearer. There were stairs leading down. The smell of the house, the forestry smell, was stronger now. The air was cool on her face. She heard birdsong, smelt moss and rivers, evening. Nick might come back at any moment, she thought. He must have known the music was coming from down there, but it lied to her. That meant, her brain ticked through the conclusions, that he didn't want her to go down those stairs. But it wasn't fair, was it, keeping such beautiful music, such kind and forgiving music, such beautiful, clear and mysterious music to himself? It wasn't his music now, was it? It was hers. It was in her ears, in her brain, sparking electricity across synapses in ways that made her unable to resist it. She was hooked like a fish. Knowing it was wrong, knowing she shouldn't, she went through. Tut tut, said her stomach, filling itself with butterflies.